The work's really hard, and there's a lot. It's very demanding work on people, and often people can only maintain that level of productivity for a certain amount of time, and then their productivity drops and they leave.
Het is zondag 8 juli en dit is Linkse Hobby's, podcast van Authentiek Links. Deze week spreken we met Benjamin Parton, organiser bij de ICT-sector bij de Uni. We spraken elkaar over de callcenter sector, waarin Teleperformance een grote jongen is, en de uitdagingen in deze sector vanuit een vakbondsperspectief. Het gesprek is Engelstalig en is opgenomen in een wat rumoerige zaal. Die betere microfoon waar we het de vorige keer over hadden, was toen nog niet binnen.
So Ben, who are you and what do you do at the Uni Union?
I work, as you said, I work for Uni Global Union. I'm the senior organizer for Uni, and I work in what's called the ICTS sector, so Information Communication Technology and Services. And I'm the person specifically within that that's responsible for contact center work at Uni.
Okay, and how long have you been working at Uni?
I've worked for Uni in total for 8 years. I worked for Uni in Latin America for 6, and I've been at the global head office for the last 2 years.
I see. So one of the sectors that you're responsible for is the call center sector.
That's correct.
What are the main problems you see at the call center sector currently?
Well, the main thing that happens within the contact center sector is that often you end up with low-paid, precarious work, and how that happens is that particularly within the outsourced contact center sector, the work goes out to tender from clients, very large clients, and then the clients play the different call center companies off against each other, and they lower their prices through usually lowering their labor costs. Around about 2/3 of contact center costs are around labor, so it's much higher than most businesses. And so to win contracts, they will lower workers' conditions and typically in that way lower their bid prices.
I see. And this happens globally, or are there differences between countries?
Well, there are differences between countries, and there's different markets, and so it's not that all companies are bidding for the same contracts. So for instance, there's a Dutch language market, there's an onshore US English language market, there's an offshore English language market, onshore Italian, offshore Italian, the same with French.
So you mean, for example, the English market is within the United States, or within, for example, India or the Dominican Republic or stuff like that?
Yeah, like the different markets. So for instance, like there's a lot of clients that will keep their work onshore for whatever reasons, or they'll move certain work offshore. So what would be quite like for instance, what can happen is that you get the voice work will stay onshore because clients like to often, it depends on who the client is, but some clients might want the voice work to be done onshore because that's what some of their customers prefer, but then they'll have the email, chat, social media management offshore to somewhere like India. So like particularly within the English language market, like the Philippines has grown and grown and grown and taken work off India. India is not so much the contact center capital of the world anymore. What is in India is more of the non-voice work because the Filipino accent is more similar, and it was also colonized by the United States bought the Philippines off the Spanish for $20 million, and so because of that, the type of English that they speak is American English. And Americans find Filipinos a lot easier to understand, and so like that work's gone there. But there is a lot of work that doesn't get offshore. So if you look at like headcount numbers, so like Teleperformance, for instance, is the world's largest contact center company, and they have 37,000 employees in the Philippines. They have 33,000 in the United States. And those clients know that the work is that contact center agents are cheaper in the Philippines. They're not stupid, but it's a separate market. Like for whatever reason, they've decided to keep their work in the United States. might be for legislative reasons, privacy reasons, because of what their customers prefer. Some clients will, it depends on the value of the client. So if you're a higher value customer, then you're more likely to be dealt with onshore. So some companies have different tier brands. So they have a low cost brand and a high cost brand. The low cost brand is more likely to get offshore and automated.
I see.
So, yeah.
And we're now specifically talking about the English language market, but this is also happening for other markets. For example, I'm from the Netherlands, and the Dutch market is, I see some parallels in that Teleperformance has started a branch in Suriname, where, the lower cost brands are being shipped off to Paramaribo, while the higher clientele is still remaining in the Netherlands, for example. So there are some parallels regarding that.
There's some parallels, and there's obviously contact centers that have been established in Suriname by a number of different countries. But also, there are, I don't speak Dutch, I'm not a Dutch speaker, but from what I can understand from talking to Dutch colleagues, it's very easy to perceive someone who's from Suriname from their accent. And there are, Dutch customers that don't want that, and that there's work, and it's not just the accent. There's also there's a number of different factors. Like where you put a contact center is not random. It's quite an art. It has to do with taxation levels, what subsidies they get from people. So typically contact center companies will go to places, they won't be generally in high value areas. So if you look at a market like the United Kingdom, the United Kingdom has a lot of contact centers for their onshore market, but they're not in London. London's too expensive. No one's going to work in London for £13,000 a year. You just can't live there. But where they move the work to are places which have generally had high unemployment, deindustrialization, so areas like Newcastle, Glasgow, Northern Ireland, that's where there's really big contact center industry. And the obvious companies will often go to those places. The same thing happens in the United States, the same thing happens in France, the same thing happens all over the world. They go to they go to the local government, they say that they'll bring a number of jobs, and the price of bringing those jobs is that they get subsidies or tax breaks. And then the local politician will get up and say, look how many jobs I've brought to the area. But that's not the only factor. The other factor is that they need to be able to plug in to a steady source of labor. So often they'll put themselves near universities or something or places like that. And that's because, the work's really hard, and it's very demanding work on people. And often people can only maintain that level of productivity for a certain amount of time, and then their productivity drops and they leave. And so they need there's a constant turnover, and they need that constant source or flow of labor coming in.
One dynamic, what is also happening at the Dutch market, and I think it also happens in other languages, is that Dutch students that are going for a year to Greece or Portugal, also being employed by Teleperformance there, for example. What the wages are significantly lower, but still the work ethic of the Dutch mentality, so to speak, exists. And the Dutch language also is, of course, present.
Well, those are different. There's a number of companies that do that. It's like Saital does it as well, WebHelp. They all use Greece and Portugal as multilingual hubs. And so firstly, those are countries which have had a significant amount of immigration within Europe. And so when those people come back, there's not necessarily the jobs for them, but they're very good speakers. So some of them, I've spoken to Portuguese and Greek workers who were born overseas. They've grown up in Germany, for example, or somewhere like that. And so they're bilingual. And then they decide that they want to go back to where their families are or to Greece and Portugal, and they have those language skills. The other thing about it is that it's no coincidence that Greece and Portugal, these are both countries that have had labor market deregulation with Troika. So that to a certain extent makes them attractive. But both Greece and Portugal have a lot of foreign temporary migrant workers or depends on the country, but some of them stay for longer. it's not the same market as the Dutch market. Like you were talking about Suriname and onshore, like it's not the same as Suriname, and it's not the same as an onshore Dutch market, because it's what the multilingual hubs. And so what a multilingual hub is that you have a number of languages together for one single client, and they set them up into teams. So there'll be a client A will have Dutch, will have a Dutch team, they'll have a French team, they'll have a German team, and all of those people will sit together. And the advantage of the multilingual hub is it's not really for big utility companies that need massive capacity in Dutch, for example, because they need too many Dutch speakers. But it's more for a client that needs to cover Dutch, French, German, Italian, or whatever. But it's not worth them setting up an individual Dutch contact center, but they need to cover it. And it's better for them as well in terms of the management of it, because a contact center, like I said, there's quite an art to these things, and it's linked to customer experience. That's often linked to brand, and so there's quite close control and management of a contact center. And so rather than having a number of little small language contact centers, you bring them together in a multilingual hub, and they're much easier from the client's perspective to try and manage that. So it's not just about cost, it's also about that. And in fact, I mean, whilst there's a lot of countries that have higher wages than Greece and Portugal, there's a lot of workers also that go there from countries that have lower wages. So, for example, like I've spoken to workers from the north of Africa that are in Greece and Portugal, and the wages at Teleperformance and at Sitel Web Help would be higher there than what they would be in North Africa. And the same thing with places like Turkey, some places in Eastern Europe. Like sometimes there can be a real premium on some of those difficult to find languages, where sometimes the wages in those countries are not necessarily high, but they need to cover it.
Right. So let me move on towards what we are doing at Uni of Local Union, of which the FNV is a part, of course. In the Netherlands, we have the issue that the FNV is the biggest trade union in the contact center branch. However, it is still a very small membership. So, what are examples where we are growing in this branch? What can you say to inspire my colleagues, for example?
I mean, it depends. It depends who you're like. It kind of depends. Like, if you want to organize workers, it's absolutely possible to organize workers within this sector. There's a number of places within Europe where contact center workers are organized. There's traditional strongholds of trade unionism, like the Nordic countries, where in Norway, Sweden, and places like that. In Finland, there's obviously contact center unions. There's contact center unions in France, Spain, Italy. And I mean, we've been supporting a federation in the Dominican Republic who's been organizing workers in big multinationals like Teleperformance, Alarica, Convergys, and
because that last one is quite a new development, isn't it? In Costa Rica.
In Dominican Republic. Yeah, no, that's been happening. Well, I mean, it's been happening for at least the last 2 years, and in that particular case, what happened is that one of the parts of the world where the contact center industry is most growing at the moment is the north of Latin America, and that's happening on the back of deportations from the United States. And so there's a lot of people that are culturally that are American. They speak English often as their first language. They've grown up in the United States. They're, for all intents and purposes, Americans, but they may be undocumented, and so for whatever reason, if the immigration authorities find them, they'll get sent back. And that's not a new phenomenon, despite the Trump government being around for only a year and a half. It's something that Obama was also deported over 2 million workers. And now what's happened is Trump has accelerated that and has been absolutely more ruthless, and that's increased that. And so it's quite a social phenomenon within those countries. But it is possible to organize within them. From a trade union perspective, I would argue that it's more important in a contact center sector that when we try and get when we organize a contact center, that we try and really push for the union to be recognized. And what I mean by that is when the union's recognized, for it to to have trade union rights. So that particularly means ability to talk to new workers when they start on the job. Because of the rotation within the contact centers. But I mean, like, there's examples in Brazil, in Argentina, in the Dominican Republic, in those countries in Europe that I mentioned, in Tunisia, in Morocco, which are both offshoring locations for French language. You know, there's trade unions that exist in those countries, and it's absolutely possible to do it. And you know, whilst it's not easy in the Netherlands, like some of these places are you know, if you look at global trade union indexes, they come up as harder than the Netherlands to organize a union.
Oh, well, some of these countries are quite more totalitarian than the Netherlands is.
The Netherlands is a country that, like, it does have labor law, and it has, you know, this sectorial bargaining possibilities, and that is a huge advantage because, I mean, if you have as I was explaining about the contracting out, if you have sector bargaining, that enables you to set a standard that all of the companies in a particular sector have to follow. And within the Netherlands, you've also got a language which isn't spoken widely. You can't send Dutch contact centers to the Philippines. You can't send, like, it's very, there is Suriname, but it's a lot harder. It's not like the English language or the French or Spanish languages.
Exactly. All right. So, and then maybe a follow-up question to that is: are there good examples of what local organizing has achieved? What are victories that we have won in different companies? Okay. Maybe you have a few examples of that.
Maybe you have some examples of things that have been won. Just off the top of my head, in the DR, that's a country where workers had a number of different problems, and they were able to win, you know, things like getting their water breaks and toilet breaks. So those are some things that were won there. I mean, like, within the contact center industry, wherever you have like a sectoral bargaining, like, what happens with that is that you're able to increase the wages. So countries like Brazil and Argentina have, you know, consistently increased contact center workers' wages through having sectorial bargaining. So I mean, those are things off the top of my head. I mean, we often have like problems like, I mean, they don't sound monumental, but things like, often issues come up like clean headsets. What else have we got?
I think that strikes me as very psychological demanding is that we are, every second that we're on the floor is being watched, is being monitored. So is there any development regarding that kind of development? Because there's quite a push in the recent years to monitor everything.
Yeah.
Every second that you're on the job.
No, that's it. That is the job. They have stats on everything. Like they extremely tightly monitor. Although the actual degree of what is monitored and how tightly it sometimes depends on the client. Sometimes you can find differences between that within the same company in the same building, depending on who the client is. Because the client really determines a lot of the matrix that the contact center company then implements. So, yeah, I can't think of any major developments on that. I mean, like, contact center monitoring has been extremely rigid for as long as as I've been aware.
Maybe last but not least, are there any specific plans, campaigning goals for the future in this branch for you and I?
Well, with Uni, what we're trying to do is we want, you know, major companies to recognize that trade union, you know, basic fundamental rights that workers have. So, you know, especially we're concerned with, you know, right to organize, right to join a union, and particularly in offshore countries, because often offshoring occurs to countries where there isn't respect for basic human rights and there isn't respect for fundamental labor standards. And so part of our struggle with unions and workers is to ensure that fundamental labour rights are respected wherever the job is moved. I can't see a future where there's no offshoring, but I also can't see a future where there's no onshoring either. Like it's part of the fabric of the industry. And what we try and do as well is sometimes we get quite nationalistic discourses about the workers over there are taking our jobs, and then the workers over there are like, well, these are just clients and companies from that are just here to exploit us. And then all that does is you just end up with workers divided with nationalistic discourses against each other, and who wins with that is the boss.
Exactly.
So, like what we're really concerned about is that, particularly about how do we ensure that fundamental labour rights are respected, especially the right to organise. And in doing that, the countries where the clients or the customers are based are really important, because often, like traditional trade union forms of protest, which have been in place since forever, they're not always, I don't want you to misunderstand, I always think, that having a march and a protest is a very valid form of expression. But sometimes within offshore contact centres, like if you do a protest in a business park in front of a building, like the local management are not going to ring the global management to tell them that there's a trade union protest, and they are definitely not going to tell the clients. And so no one's going to find out about it, and therefore it won't put any pressure on the decision makers. And so like we really rely on trade union networks and solidarity between countries to be able to get that message to the decision makers, and also to the clients and the customers, because otherwise, those people end up being isolated. Because, like I said, like in the old days, we didn't have contact centres because we didn't have a virtual economy, and we all knew who the boss was. He lived in the rich suburb, and it's very easy to go and create a problem. But this is a different sort of a context, and so we're really reliant on those networks and solidarity links between places.
You spoke about divide and conquer policies, like on the nationality question. Another one is another classic tactic regarding that is the yellow unions. In the Netherlands we have certain yellow unions, which are, for the listeners maybe, those are on the boss's side on most topics. What is our policy regarding those unions, or do we have any campaigning goals perhaps to win against those dividing tactics?
No, I mean, like, it depends on the country and the context, because there's yellow unions, and then there's also simulations of unions to block real unions. So there's a number of different tactics which are used. Like generally, what a classic tactic is with non-representative trade union bodies or simulations of trade union bodies is that we have to campaign around the issues that workers care about. And we have to find the influential people within the workplace to campaign with us. And then, hopefully with those people and the issues, then ultimately the yellow unions or the simulated unions, they're not going to deal with those issues. So either you bring people over from them, or you sign them up. That's a classic trade union kind of tactic, I guess.
Ben, thank you for your time.
Okay, cool.